The year was 1917. Captain Tom Ryan Jr. had witnessed a lot while steering his boat on the Ohio River, but that evening was different. As daylight faded, strange happenings emerged on Mustapha Island. The R. Dunbar, his trusty steamboat for nearly 20 years, glided along the riverbank, its lights cutting through the darkness. Captain Tom strained his eyes at the island. What he saw sent chills down his spine. Flickering yellow lights danced among the trees. These weren't friendly campfire glows or distant lighthouse beams. They felt otherworldly. Tom knew the river's stories, those of ghostly lanterns guiding lost souls. But he'd never seen anything like this. Soon, rumors spread among the river folk. Other captains reported similar sightings. Each night, the lights multiplied, casting spooky shadows on the water. Some claimed they saw movement near the lights. As the tales grew, sailors began to exchange stories over whiskey in smoky corners of waterfront bars. The legend of the burning ghosts of Mustapha Island was born. In 1939, passengers aboard the Gordon C. Green steamer shared their own encounter with these glowing figures. Captivating listeners from the Pittsburgh press, they talked about fiery shapes dancing by the shore, beckoning the living to join them in on their fate. But where did this haunting really come from? What sparked the unease and the story? Some said it was the souls of a shipwrecked crew from the early 1800s, lost in a fiery blast while trying to ignite the river to escape pirates. Others claimed it was the hidden treasure that had been buried deep by the infamous river pirate Mike Fink, now protected by spirits that he had betrayed. Some even believed the eerie lights were just swamp gas mixed with glowing fungi, a strange natural trick that happened only in rare conditions. But the truth shocked everyone. On January 5, 1916, the steam packet Kanawa sank in the Ohio River, claiming 16 lives near Mustapha Island, a small bar island in West Virginia. Fred Hoyt, the second clerk aboard the Kanawa, survived and penned an intense account of the disaster. On the chilly evening of January 4, 1916, just before night fell, the Kanawa set off from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It had just been repaired at the Parkersburg docks. Passengers and crew felt assured that the boat would make its regular trip safely to Charleston, West Virginia. The crew was seasoned and capable. Hoyt himself had made 130 trips between Pittsburgh and Charleston over the last 3 years. Even though the Ohio River was rushing high and fast, Hoyt believed it would be another smooth journey just like the rest. Strangely, a large metal lifeboat had gone missing weeks before, leaving the boat without its usual safety gear. The Kanawa steamed through the cold night for 172 miles and arrived in Marietta, Ohio, on a windy winter day. Here, events started that would ultimately spell trouble. Henry Best owned the wharf boat in Marietta. He insisted on a quick delivery of 2 barrels of oil to Little Hocking, Ohio. Captain Brady Berry voiced his worries about the tricky and risky stop, especially with the strong winds and the nearby construction at Lock 19. But Best wouldn't budge, and Berry let it go. Fred Hoyt spotted his mother at the Marietta landing, waiting to see him. He hurried over and she shared her fears about a possible disaster. Fred glanced at the river, acknowledging her worries. The water was high, and there was rough swells. He briefly considered her advice, but dismissed it, thinking she was just being overly cautious, as mothers do. He got back on the boat and continued downstream towards Parkersburg. When they reached Parkersburg, Tom Sams, the cook, walked off the gangway, headed for the B&O train depot. He told Captain Berry he was just too scared to continue, and he had a bad feeling. He was leaving. Fred knew Mrs. Fitzpatrick and her 6-year-old son were supposed to get off at Lee Creek near Belleville, but he realized that due to flooding, they would need to disembark at Belleville or even Reedsville, Ohio. He suggested to Mrs. Fitzpatrick that it might be safer for them to stay the night in Parkersburg and catch the train in the morning, but she declined this suggestion. This choice would turn out to be a terrible one, as they would soon become victims of the unfolding disaster. It took less than an hour to travel from Parkersburg to Little Hocking, Ohio. By 7 p.m., the Kanawa had delivered 2 barrels of oil and was trying to return to the main current. Known for its good handling, the boat faced trouble that night. The strong current and winds pushed it sideways into the waves. Captain Barry had to perform a tricky maneuver, but he got it back on track. The river was high, completely covering Loch 19, but that wasn't the issue. The light draft boat could have crossed over the loch walls easily. However, the barely visible towers on either side of the loch posed a real problem. At 7:20 p.m., in total darkness, Captain Barry struggled to regain control, and the Kanawa collided with the lower tower. Fred Hoyt had just gone to the Texas deck and was chatting with steward Lloyd G. when the crash happened. They were nearly thrown off their feet. The tower had punched a huge hole in the wooden hull close to the boilers. Hoyt sprinted to the forward boiler deck. Feeling the boat tilt dangerously, he looked back and saw several women in the cabin. He thought about warning them to get to the guardrails, but just then the generator failed and the lights went out. In the pitch black, Hoyt jumped over the port rail and slid down. The boat steadied for a moment, but he felt hot steam rush over him as the furnaces died, followed by freezing water rising to his knees. Most people trapped below deck had likely drowned at this point. Many were stuck in their staterooms because the doors were now jammed. Hoyt thought about the big metal lifeboat that they had left back in Pittsburgh. He recalled his mother urging him to leave at Marietta. No one had managed to save a light of any kind, and the sheer terror of the situation defies the imagination. Later, the crew of the Kanawa faced harsh criticism for seeming to save themselves first, with many of them reaching the shore before the passengers. Harold B. Wright, a young Lock 19 employee, had immediately set out after the Kanawa in a big U.S. Corps of Engineers yawl. He took into shore 2 or more loads of survivors and left Hoyt and the others with a lantern, which was said gave them courage. The violent movement had dislodged the boilers, which were later found near Newberry Island. As the winds calmed and a light rain fell, Hoyt felt the boat drag across the bottom, jolting him several times. Finally, at Mustapha Island, he and a few others boarded a lifeboat and reached the shore safely. Meanwhile, the remains of the Kanawa drifted away, with Captain Barry and a young cabin boy still clinging on it. They were rescued when the wreck washed ashore. Just 2 hours since the disaster, a special train arrived from Parkersburg for survivors along the coast. Hoyt found shelter in a cottage with a warm fire, feeling like he was at a luxury lodge at this point. He sent a message to his mother in Marietta to let her know he was safe. Back in Marietta, the news about the Kanawa's sinking was already flashing in theaters. A whole German family had been lost on the boat. An 80-year-old woman was saved after climbing onto the wreck. Engineer Dude Petit floated 18 miles to safety on a makeshift raft. Stories linger that a clerk named Bert Wolf might still be stuck in the vault today. The Kanawa ended up grounding off of Mustapha Island, and John McConnell used his motorboat, the Teaser, to bring the bodies found aboard back to Parkersburg. The Ohio River below Parkersburg, West Virginia, was long ago known as the graveyard of the Ohio and was considered one of the most dangerous sections on the 981-mile waterway. It's now a popular destination for water recreation. It was long littered with the wrecks of steamers and barges and mariners and passengers. As so often happens after such tragic events, the unexplainable is explained by superstitions or become the basis for the beginning of a new superstition. The lights remained year after year. A few brave souls attempted to investigate, but their stories were met with skepticism and fear. Fishermen spoke of their nets coming up empty when they approached the island, while others swore they heard mournful cries on the wind. Today, you can still go to the island, and you can even spend the night, but you have to have your own boat. So if you get a chance to go see the lights for yourself, just be careful because you may end up carrying your own lantern on the island of the lost spirits forever. Thank you for watching, and until next time, keep those lights on.
Run free and dive into the sky. Hear the wind crying